You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old time and bluegrass music. It's one of the most popular instrumentals in both bluegrass and old time music today. And it's a great piece that kind of has it all: powerful melody, interesting chord changes, and these cool little rhythmic figures. And of course, the title of the tune is kind of awesome too. But the history of the tune has always been somewhat of a mystery. So stick around because we'll explore the origins of this piece, along with the artists behind them who played an important role in shaping and popularizing the number as it's come down to us today. And unlike a lot of the other fiddle tunes I've covered on this channel, this will be a musical journey that doesn't originate in Appalachia, or the Ozarks, or any other part of the southern US. Instead, we're going to travel up north, and pretty way up north. And we'll also discuss the origin behind the name. And be sure to stick around until the end, because we'll also take a trip overseas and listen to an old number I found that may be the original source of our tune. But you'll have to listen to it for yourself to decide if this really is the granddaddy of Whiskey Before Breakfast. And finally, we'll listen to a newer version, but with lyrics, and it's actually pretty great. So let's dive in. Our story of the origin of Whiskey Before Breakfast starts with this man, who is in fact credited as having composed the first ever arrangement of the tune, the Manitoba Canadian fiddler Andy DeJarlis, who's been called one of the greatest exponents of old time music in all of Canada. Born Andrew Joseph Patrice Ephraim Desjardins on September 29th, 1914, in Woodridge, Manitoba, he was the youngest of 14 children. He came from a family of Métis fiddlers, and for my listeners not familiar with this term, it's a distinctive style of traditional fiddling originating with the Métis people, who are composed of a mixture of both Indigenous and European ancestry in Canada. The roots of this music can be traced back to the 18th and 19th centuries, especially among Scottish settlers, First Peoples, and French Canadian fur traders. And the music is a blend of Native American rhythms combined with European folk styles, especially Scottish and French fiddle music. The style itself is known for its lively tempo, complex bowing techniques, and its strong connection to dance. DeJarlis began playing fiddle at the age of 15, after his father, who was also an accomplished fiddler, would take him along to various jam sessions in the area. He moved to Winnipeg in 1934, and a year later, at the age of 21, he won his first fiddling contest in 1935. And for the next 11 years, DeJarlis performed on a Winnipeg radio station, which is when he changed his name from Desjardins to DeJarlis, apparently because radio announcers couldn't pronounce his name correctly. And during all this time, he toured many dance halls throughout northern Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. There's even a count in his biography of one of these dances where DeJarlis is said to have once played a dance from 7 p.m. to 7 in the morning, which turned out to be a rare occurrence for a Saturday night gig back then, as usually the band was ordered to stop at midnight in order to observe the Lord's Day, at which time the band would play one last song, God Save the Queen, while everyone else stood at attention. And during this time, DeJarlis was considered by many to be one of the most popular entertainers on the prairies. But his musical career wasn't without some challenges. Despite his high level of musical ability, DeJarlis was known to have been plagued by severe bouts of stage fright. And to add to that, when he was around his mid 30s, his health began taking a turn. One bandmate recalls how DeJarlis began struggling on stage with his breathing. He recounts, quote, "It was so bad that playing with him on stage, he'd have a spittoon, and he was constantly bringing up phlegm throughout the shows." But he didn't let all this keep him back too much because by 1952, DeJarlis had won over 20 fiddling contests in Western Canada. By 1956, he began making records with various music labels. So that by the time he passed away in 1975, when he was 71 years old, he'd made about 38 records in total. And DeJarlis was also a prolific composer, having published more than 200 musical compositions to his credit. His compositions including a variety of styles, from jigs and reels to polkas and waltzes. And in 1957, he published this book entitled Canadian Fiddle Tunes from Red River Valley, where on page 8 we find our first ever printed version of Whiskey Before Breakfast. And here's a recording of DeJarlis himself playing the tune, and it's simply a masterpiece of just good old Canadian fiddling. And this tune book went on to be widely popular with fiddle players throughout Canada in the 1950s and 60s. And we'll return to DeJarlis in a bit to answer some unanswered questions, but first let's follow this tune to the US, where eventually it began popping up over here not too long afterwards. And this is where things get a bit hazy, as there's little documentation on how this tune actually spread from Canada to the US. But as far as I could tell, our first actual recording of the tune in the States dates to 1962, 5 years after DeJarlis' composition date, when the Tennessee fiddler Tommy Jackson would record what appears to be the first US version of Whiskey Before Breakfast on one of his square dance albums. And you can listen to my previous video on Cherokee Shuffle for more info on this great but often forgotten fiddler whose recordings were highly influential during this time period. And then 10 years later, in 1972, we find another recording, which helped further popularize the tune for an even wider audience in the States. It was made by this man, the Texas fiddler Dick Barrett. Barrett recorded this tune on a 1972 Voyager LP entitled More Fiddle Jam Sessions. He was born in 1918 in Maysville, Oklahoma. Growing up in Texas and Oklahoma, he survived the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl as a child by picking cotton. On the heels of the 30s, he was sent to the Pacific Theater of World War II in the service of the U.S. Army Combat Engineers. But he was also an excellent musician and teacher, and well loved by everyone. And here's Barrett's recording of Whiskey Before Breakfast, and this one is just as great. While DeJarlis' version has a bit of a hop to it, this one has more of that great Texas groove. Check it out. While we don't know where Barrett actually learned the tune from, the title of the album does suggest that Whiskey Before Breakfast had been floating around and circulating in jam circles by around this time. And I wasn't around during this era, but some musicians recount that whiskey was in fact being played a lot in the old-time jam circles around the late 60s and on into the 70s, even claiming that by the late 70s the tune's popularity had in fact played itself out and had entered that no man's land known as the zone of the overplayed. But Barrett's album was a very influential one for many fiddlers in the 1970s. And eventually, beginning in the late 70s and on into the 80s, recordings started popping up in the bluegrass world, with notable early popular versions being made by Norman Blake and Tony Rice. And what's interesting to note is that the tune's rise in the US from an obscure Canadian fiddle tune to bluegrass standard appears to be a fairly recent development. And a big part of its quick adoption into the standard repertoire is due to its strong melody. But I kind of wonder if the title doesn't have also something to do with it because, well, let's be honest, it's one of the coolest names for a fiddle tune, like, ever. So, we should probably discuss where this title actually comes from. And to do that, we need to get back to DeJarlis. While DeJarlis is credited as the arranger of the tune, it appears that he didn't actually compose it out of thin air. As it is a common practice among music publishers to copyright arrangements of traditional tunes, Whiskey Before Breakfast is one such case. An account in DeJarlis's biography points out that DeJarlis actually learned this tune from another fiddler, the father of the Métis fiddler Teddy Boy Hoole. The story goes that DeJarlis and the elder Hoole were up all night drinking whiskey and jamming until dawn before finally passing out. When DeJarlis finally woke up, he remembered the last tune they played in those early morning hours and came up with the title on the spot, Whiskey Before Breakfast. So, while this story gives us a likely source for the title, it's also shed some light on where this tune may have originally come from, because it appears that the melody is in fact older than DeJarlis's composition date of 1957. And since we know that the tune was already in the repertoire of Teddy Hoole's father, we can say with some certainty that Whiskey Before Breakfast does appear to be an old traditional Métis fiddle tune. But if it is an old fiddle tune, then what was the original name? And where did it ultimately come from? And tracing this tune further back in time is where things get a bit hairy. But let's see where the trail leads us. I was able to find some documented sources to give us some evidence that the tune is older than DeJarlis's composition date. One Canadian historian and folklorist, Roy Gibbons, notes that the tune we know as Whiskey Before Breakfast was in fact already an old popular Métis tune that was played with dance troupes in Western Canada for some time. And the fiddler Miley Barron, who was born in 1910 in Manitoba, recounts that he in fact used to hear this piece being played for dances when he was a young boy, which would seem to suggest it being at least a generation or two older than DeJarlis's published date. And if we widen our search a bit outside of Western Canada, we do find an old melody that bears a very strong resemblance to whiskey, which is also found in Canada, but in the eastern part. And it too is and was a very popular number back in the day. And it's a piece found not just in Canada, but in parts of the northern US as well. And it goes by many different names, depending on where it was played. In Quebec, it appears under the title of La Grande Douce, or The Grumbling Woman. It's a tune that usually accompanies step dancing in that area, and there are many different versions of the La Grande Douce title, as the name usually refers more to the fiddle's tuning than with any one specific melody. And in Nova Scotia, the tune appears under the title Spirits of the Morning. And even the title bears a very strong resemblance to our Whiskey Before Breakfast name, making one wonder how DeJarlis really came up with his title. Then again, I wasn't actually able to find any clear evidence to claim which title is in fact older. But for some time, many music historians considered Whiskey Before Breakfast to have originated in Nova Scotia before eventually moving westward. But in many parts of the northeastern US, it was most commonly referred to as the Great Eastern Reel. There is some dispute as to the meaning of the title, but some think it refers to a region of the country, while others believe it's associated with the legendary ship of that title that's been mostly forgotten of today. The Great Eastern was one of the most famous transatlantic steamships of the mid 19th century. The ship was an astounding feat of engineering at the time. It was the largest vessel of its age. It was originally called the Leviathan due to the fact that it was 6 times larger than any ship ever then built. Instead of the usual wood, the Great Eastern was made of iron, weighed 19,000 tons, and measured 690 feet. But like another more famous large transatlantic ship, this one too had its share of bad luck. It once had a terrible explosion, causing one of its funnels to be launched into the air like a rocket. Members of the crew were scalded by the blast, and one threw himself over the side, only to be mangled to death by the blade wheels. The designer, upon hearing the news, had a stroke and died soon afterwards. The Great Eastern was built so large as to be able to run from Europe to Australia with only one stop for fuel. But she was never employed in that task. She was assigned the run from New York to Liverpool instead. But she was never able to attract the number of passengers needed to become profitable. The biggest reason being her great rolling in the waves of the Atlantic, which produces seasickness of monumental proportions. After a few years of mounting losses, the great ship was taken out of service, but later then resurrected to be used in laying the first permanent transatlantic cable. Only a ship of her size could carry the enormous amount of cable necessary to span the Atlantic Ocean. Here's a version of the Great Eastern Reel by Paddy Kusterock and Julie Fitzgerald. I'll play both Whiskey and the Great Eastern Reel side by side. And like Whiskey, this one too has that strong, flowing, well crafted melody. And see if you can make out any similarity between the two. While not completely identical, the two tunes are very similar in most parts. And of all these tune titles we discussed, which all share pretty much the same melody, the Great Eastern Reel is the one we can actually trace the furthest back in time, as far as documentation is concerned, because it turns up in this printed edition of Ryan's Mammoth Collection from 1883. But here's where we find another surprising thing, because in the same publication, the same melody actually appears twice. Once as the Great Eastern Reel, and again under a different title called Bennett's Favorite. And here's another clue that suggests that our melody may have roots in another genre of music besides just the folk tradition, because it's credited to one Clem Titus. Now, there's very little information about this Titus figure, but I was able to find a mention of him found in Colonel Thomas Alston Brown's A History of the New York Stage from 1903, where he's listed as a quote, violin jig player for a minstrel group called the White Serenaders. So it does appear that our Whiskey Before Breakfast tune may have been performed on minstrel stages of the 1800s. And it also appears that Bennett's favorite was and continues to be one of the tunes frequently played by contra dance musicians in Maine and even up into parts further north into Canada's maritime provinces as well, leading some to believe this may be our true origin of whiskey before breakfast. And we'll get to another interesting theory later in a bit, but either way, we can pretty much safely say that even though it was first published in the 1950s, the melody of Whiskey Before Breakfast had been floating around the US and Canada since at least the 1800s. And while I was researching the origins of this tune and trying to find the ultimate source, I kept coming across phrases like possibly of Irish origin or may have Irish roots. And I mean, let's be honest here, the tune does sound very Irish, and I'm not just talking about the title. And the fact that it's popular among Métis and maritime artists with deep Celtic roots does suggest a strong likelihood of a British Isles source as well. But for a time, I couldn't find any real hard evidence pointing to an actual Irish source. I mean, I was able to find some similar sounding Irish tunes, particularly these two, John Brennan's Reel and the Silver Spire. Clearly, these must be our source of whiskey, right? Well, let's listen to one of them, the Silver Spire. So clearly, this is a related tune, but is it our source? It turns out that Silver Spire was first recorded by recent Irish immigrants to New York City, and it was actually named after the recently built Chrysler building, leading many music historians to believe this Irish version is actually derived from our American version, namely the Great Eastern Reel. And as far as John Brennan's Reel goes, well, that title was named after an Irish musician who played during the 1950s. So, yeah, clearly not a very old source. And for a long time, many musicologists have been kind of stumped by this one. While many frequently mention whiskey before breakfast being derived from an old Celtic source, well, where exactly is it? And the answers to this question remained a bit of a mystery for some time. But then I came upon another theory of where whiskey before breakfast may have come from. And it's found in an old banjo newsletter article from the 1990s by Ken Perlman, who was also stumped by this very same question. Perlman spent many years gathering old fiddle tunes throughout Prince Edward Island, looking for the source of our melody. And he noticed that Whiskey Before Breakfast also bears a striking resemblance to an old Prince Edward Island tune called Larry O'Gaff. I'll play both tunes side by side. Give it a listen. So, as you can hear, there is a strong resemblance here. And even though I wasn't able to pull up that much research to support the claim, and I don't think Perlman was even familiar with Bennett's favorite, maybe Bennett's favorite derives from this Larry O'Gaff tune. And there is a case to be made because it appears that Larry O'Gaff wasn't just played in Prince Edward Island. It also turns up on older recordings and old documentation from other parts of the Maritimes, and even in parts of New England and New York as well. So we know it was somewhat popular in this region. And I will also note that Larry O'Gaff is in fact an old Irish tune that dates back to at least the mid 1700s. So maybe in the end, we did find our Irish connection after all. And before I leave you guys, I've got one more version of Whiskey Before Breakfast that you have to hear. It's a version of the tune with lyrics that were penned by this man, the Tennessee musician Mike Cross. Born in Appalachia, Cross didn't actually start playing music until he was in college, on a golf scholarship. As the story goes, one day he got sick in a snowstorm during his junior year and ended up spending the night in a friend's dorm room. As luck would have it, turned out his friend's roommate happened to play the guitar, and over the next 2 days, that roommate taught Cross his first chords and songs. And Cross went on to be a great musician, much loved by everyone. And Cross's version is kind of great. His lyrics are both humorous, but also quite soulful as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and once again, thanks for listening.
Well, early one day the sun wouldn't shine. I was walking down the street not feeling too fine. I saw two old men with a bottle between them. This is the song I heard them singing. Lord preserve us and protect us. We've been drinking whiskey for breakfast. Well, I stopped by the steps where they were sitting, and I couldn't believe how drunk they were getting. I said, "Oh man, you've been drinking long." They said, "Long enough to start singing this song. Lord preserve us and